There we go. It'll go live. Okay, everybody. Hopefully we're here. And just triple checking to make sure everything's working. Can you hear me okay? If anyone's out there? Um, Trying to get this up and running correctly. Let's see. Double checking. What's this doing? Okay. There we go. Got it. Looks like it's fine. Okay. Okay, so welcome to week two of digital marketing. In this week, we'll be doing a number of things, obviously. Bringing up my notes right now. First of all, we're moving away from like kind of the course overview and what is the history of the internet and all that stuff to actually starting talking about digital marketing strategy and digital marketing research, right? So for this week, just to remind everyone, you want to watch videos 1 to 5 that were in the original on the Moodle. And you also, besides the strategy and research, one of the things you're going to get this week that you didn't get last week is you're going to get your first example of one of the tool dives that I do. So I tend to do these little dives into trying to explore a particular tool and show you how it works. And this one is the Google Digital Garage, right? Which kind of is a quick little introduction to digital marketing, and you can actually get these like certificates for digital marketing on there. And I kind of take you through some examples. Now, I think they've updated a little bit since last year when I recorded the video about it, but it's still up there. You should be able to explore. It should be somewhat similar to what it has, but the interface might look a little different. Um, and every week I'll be going through one of those. So you'll be getting a different tool that we can explore and play with each week. Not every single week, because sometimes we have like the exams and stuff like that, but most weeks you'll be seeing those as well, right? So that's one aspect I wanted to mention. The other aspect I wanted to mention, besides watching those videos, is to participate in the discussion on blockchain on Top Hat. So there are two readings up on blockchain that you can see. One is a reading about from the AMA, from the American Marketing Association, that kind of covers what blockchain is and how it might be useful. It's more of a maybe a little bit more of an introductory reading than the other one. But then the other reading is a kind of a deeper dive into all the implications of blockchain for marketers, written by a friend of mine that goes up at NYU Stern from the Harvard Business Review. So kind of read over both of those. They're pretty short. Neither one's longer than a couple of pages. And then, participate in the discussion on Top Hat. Speaking of which, I wanted to make a special announcement about Top Hat. I was told by Kimberly she's doing a good job of monitoring the Top Hat discussion. And one thing that she mentioned to me is only about a little over half of you are actually signed up for Top Hat. Again, if you're going to, for the credit for participation in this class, you have to be signed up for that and participating in that. There's no deadline on participation. I do want to make as much of this class as possible asymmetrical, but so that you don't have to, be doing things the exact same, asynchronous. That's the word I wanted to use, not asymmetrical. So you don't have to be doing things necessarily at the same time the rest of the class is. But on the other hand, it does help to kind of stay up to it. You don't want to be getting down to the wire and then having to do something like 12 classroom participation discussions. So try and stay up to speed, try and answer some of the comments, questions and feedback as you go along. And Kimberly will be doing a good job of kind of checking in and sending me notes on what you do. So for instance, right at the end of today, at the end of after I get through these notes in the here, I'm going to be going over some of the comments that were sent from people that Kimberly picked out as being particularly interesting that I wanted to discuss, right? There's also a video up now on augmented reality. Let me double check to make sure that video is up. Um, oh wait, no, so that was something I was going to talk over today. That's right. Okay. So I'm going to talk over that during the office hours today, is talk a little bit about augmented reality as well. So we'll be discussing that as we go forward. Um, So let me see. Okay, yeah. Um, The other thing to make sure you do is make sure you turn in your team member request by January 15th, right? So this is that's Wednesday by midnight. If you don't have a team member, so if you don't know who to partner with, right, that's fine. Just turn in an assignment with just your name, and that gives me a good place to start. On the other hand, if you do have a team, I don't need a separate turn in from every single member of the team. I just need one turn in for the entire team. So go ahead and turn those in by January 15th. That gives me a week to kind of play with all the different names and make sure the teams are roughly the right size. And then sometime next week, I'll post a list of all the teams so that everyone knows what team they're on, right? And then you can reach out and contact each other and start working on it. During my live class, I came up with a couple, or the offline class, I came up with a couple questions about the project, and specifically what kind of business to work with. And one thing I always like to mention is that it's useful to find a small or medium business that you're interested in working with, that hopefully you have some sort of connection to as well, right? So that you can actually interact with them and get some information back from them. If it's a larger business that you're working with, right, and that larger business uh, is something that you have an interaction, you have a link to, but maybe is too big to cover their entire digital marketing plan, then think about maybe breaking off a product or a promotion or a particular channel, right, that you could then discuss a little bit in more depth, right, and that's useful to do. So rather than trying to tackle like a digital marketing plan for all of Apple, right? You know, talk about how the smartwatch needs to be reinvigorated or something like that, right? And that's a very useful aspect to do. But again, I try and stick with a brand, a company, an organization that someone in your group has a close connection to. I find that those usually wind up making for the best projects overall. Um, Okay. And finally, of course, the optional reading for this week is chapters 1, 2, and 4 of the textbook that kind of talk about digital marketing strategy and research. So that's the big assignments. So watching the videos, participating in the discussion on blockchain, turn in your team member request, and the optional reading of the chapters, right? And again, just a quick reminder, make sure and sign up for Top Hat, get involved with those discussions active. Oh, I did have one question came over email on Top Hat as to when the Top Hat discussions would go live. That was partially a screw up on my part. I meant to make the Top Hat discussion on blockchain live when I posted the blockchain readings, and in general, that's the case. I won't send out a separate email about the readings because they'll just go live as soon as the content goes live on Moodle. I just forgot to put the Top Hat. I forgot to assign the Top Hat discussion to you all so that it showed up on your page. So I fixed that. It's now available. You can go and participate in the Top Hat discussion as soon as you're done listening to me talk today. So um, on the one on blockchain, that is. So okay. So that all being said, as I mentioned briefly at the top, one of the things I do want to spend a little bit of time today is talking about augmented reality. So I will bring up my slides on it and we'll talk through that. Give me a split second. Glasses. Okay. Oh, and one thing, by the way, I will be discussing in next week's office hours is I'll be discussing some of the survey results. So I'll be putting those together and coming up with them. I usually have them together already, but I'm just running a little behind. I just got back from traveling on Saturday morning. So let's pull up the augmented reality slides. See, I kind of want video capture device. No, I want. Okay. Mm, Hold on one second, just gotta get this. Why is it not showing me the one I want? Hmm. Huh. May have changed OBS a little bit more since the last time I checked. Give me a split second here. Yeah, this will work, I think, if nothing else. Just gotta fix a couple of buttons here. We should be good to go. Apologies for the dead time. Uh, oh, okay, that's annoying. Well, how about this? I don't have, it looks like because of the way they changed my normal setup, unless I can get it somehow other way. Let me try a couple things real quick. I may not be able to easily get this to display. If that's the case, what I'll do is I'll talk through augmented reality with you, and I'll put the slides up online so you can see them later. Slides don't have anything terribly spectacular in them, but you'll at least be able to check them out at a later date. Let me try one last thing here. Window capture. No, oh, that's just the desktop picture. That's OBS. Oh, there we go. That's crazy. Then we get the caption. The caption. Oh, don't do that. Okay. Um, yeah, I'm gonna have to fix that later. Okay, so let's just talk through the augmented reality readings. So if you read through the augmented reality readings, right, one thing that you might wonder is, what is augmented reality? Well, um, as described in both the reading and in the podcast, right, augmented reality is a live view of the world that's enhanced by some sort of additional information or content, and that's distinct from virtual reality where you don't really see the world. Instead, you just see the images that are projected at you instead, right? Now, the podcast makes a distinction now between live augmented reality and virtual reality and mixed reality. And mixed reality is when the aug- augmented reality can actually interact with the world, right? So, um, for instance, it comes up with this example of, let's say you had a pair of glasses that when I look at a can of soup, I could actually see the information, the nutritional content of that soup, right? Now, in an augmented reality world, no matter how I turn the can, it would still show me that same informational content. In a mixed reality world, it's almost projecting the nutritional information directly onto that can. So when I turn the can, it actually it winds up obscuring or turning away the piece of nutritional information, right? So that ability to kind of interact with objects in the world is what is called mixed reality, which is a little distinct. Of course, there's been a couple examples of this technology in the past. You could think of things like Google Glass, which many of you probably saw at some point, Microsoft's HoloLens, right? But probably the most classic example of augmented reality that most people have experience with is Pokemon Go, right? This kind of craze that swept the world and is apparently still quite popular in many places and still being used quite a bit. It's a little game where for those of you who haven't played it, where you can walk around and you can basically hold your phone up to kind of view the world in certain places. It'll show you that there's like Pokemon out in the world, and you can go and try and capture those Pokemon, right? Now, um, you know, originally it was based just upon geolocation, so it didn't really have an augmented reality aspect because there was nothing that it was taking from the camera to kind of relate to that content. But what I heard is in some of the most recent versions, it actually does take into account what it's seeing. So that if it sees, for instance, a river through the camera, it will show a water type Pokemon. Whereas if it sees like a tree, it'll show an earth like Pokemon. Or I gotta admit, my Pokemon knowledge is not the greatest. So something along those lines, right? Um, Now, those are kind of examples of the different types of technology. How can this actually be used in a marketing context? Well, there are two clear AR use cases for marketing that I've come up with, and I'd love to hear if any of you have other ones that you would be interested in discussing that are out there, right? But the first clear use case is like an information content enhancement kind of use case, right? So if you and you can think about this as kind of either from a focal brand or comparison, right? From a focal brand, you could, for instance, see someone moving into um, like one of the examples I'll talk about a little bit is, purchasing a soda pop at a gas station, and there's an augmented reality application built into the drink that they have, where they get additional content or information about that particular drink, or maybe it's a contest, right, where when they scan the thing, they get a scratch off or something, right? Comparison rise, you could think of an augmented reality device that could provide you information about multiple brands, right? So it could, for instance, as you walk around an area, display reviews about the restaurants in the area or the businesses, and give you content to help you make those decisions, right? Now, another clear use case besides just information content enhancement is product interaction. So some AR devices will actually give you the ability to virtually interact with a product in a particular space. I think the kind of great example of this is Wayfair's Wayfair View, which allows you to take like a piece of furniture and project it into your actual like living room or dining room and see how that piece of furniture would look in that context, right? There's also things like AR mirrors that allow you to try and close, for instance. So in the focal brand example, both Speedway and Hess, for instance, have done things where they've kind of had augmented reality on drinks or on soda bottles. In the comparison example, Yelp actually has this thing called the Yelp Monocle, which allows you to kind of walk down the street while showing it, and it shows little pop-ups of different reviews on the monocle for restaurants you're passing, right? Um, Another example, so the Wayfair, I mentioned the Wayfair View. That's a great product interaction example where you can actually just project a piece of furniture that you might want to buy directly into the space you're looking at. Um, now, one thing I like to think about, and one question that often comes up is how likely are any of these to be used by consumers, right? And so from that perspective, I often like to talk about Everett Rogers' theory of diffusion of innovation. So Everett Rogers wrote this great book about how do innovations diffuse through society, right? Why do people decide to adopt them? And he lays out five factors in particular that are responsible for the adoption of any innovation. I think they're very clearly appropriate to augmented reality, right? The first is relative advantage, right? How much does this particular piece of technology or this innovation improve upon the past innovations that have existed, right? Does it have a huge benefit? And for augmented reality, you can think this through, right? Like, so for instance, Wayfair View, right, allows you to project furniture into a space that you did not have that furniture in, right? And literally, before this, people used to like measure furniture by hand and then take scotch tape and tape it out on the floor and not scotch tape, masking tape, right? To kind of see how different pieces of furniture might fit in the room. Seems like Wayfair View has a pretty good comparative relative advantage in that. It's a lot easier to use. You don't have to have all the dimensions of everything. Like, you don't have to have gone out and measured them. You could actually just go and do it. You don't have to keep putting up and down masking tape, right? You can kind of play around it very quickly, right? The second aspect that Rogers talks about is compatibility, right? What what kind of things that people do is the innovation compatible with, right? So trying on clothes seems like a classic one, right? Like I want to go and I want to try on a new piece of clothing, right? Decide if I want to buy that piece of clothing. It's very typical for someone to kind of walk into a store and just kind of start trying on clothes. Well, now I can do it in a virtual context. That gives me a little bit more power. I can go through, like, I don't have to go and ask the clerk for 20 pieces of clothing. I can ask for I can just sweep through and look at everything. It's very compatible with our standard way of operating, right? Maybe the Wayfair View one isn't as compatible, right? Probably definitely the case that the soda pop based contests at a gas station, that's not very compatible with the way we traditionally work. But some of these are. So the third aspect Rogers talks about is complexity. You want the object to be as simple as possible, and this is a place where AR might suffer, right? To for a lot of people, getting those systems up and running, it's somewhat difficult. Now, the Pokemon Go is a great counterexample, right? Here's a toy. You install it on your standard phone, right? You just have your phone right there. You put the app on there, and all of a sudden you can almost immediately start walking around and playing the game, right? And that's a very simple level of complexity. So maybe there's some aspects that AR can posit on there. Fourth aspect Rogers talked about is trialability, right? Like how much do I have to do to just try something out before I decide to purchase it, right? So, I feel like Google Glass and the Snapchat Spectacles and Microsoft HoloLens, they all suffer in this area, right? Because in order to try them out, there isn't some place I can go and just be like, I want to try out the Microsoft HoloLens. I pretty much have to buy a copy, right, to try it out, right? Now, in the virtual reality space, there seems to be some interest in like making like virtual reality arcades and stuff like that. And so that seems like that's a way to go with trialability. And maybe with AR, they could do something similar where you have kind of maybe more entertainment aspects that allow people to try out AR before they decide to kind of fully invest in it. The next one aspect is observability, right? How easy is it for you to know that your fellow consumers are using this innovation, right? And that one could be a little bit tricky, right? Observability um, could be difficult in an AR context. For instance, if someone's playing Pokemon Go, if you know what Pokemon Go is, it's pretty obvious they're playing it. But if you don't know what it is, it just looks like they're looking at their phone and kind of flicking things at it, right? And so there's nothing really easily observable about a lot of AR. So I'd love for you, once I put these slides up, take a look at them, think through these five advantages or five issues to think about when talking about AR adoption, and try and figure out if there's some way to overcome these for augmented reality, specifically for, let's say your firm or whatever organization you're working for wants to build an augmented reality app, right? How would you combat these five factors? How would you make sure that as many consumers as possible are going to adopt it? So just something to think about. One thing I like to do at this point is also, now I've gone through kind of my notes of what I want to discuss on AR, is kind of bring up the notes from all of you from the Top Hat discussion and talk through some of those. So I've got my nice notes pulled up already that Kimberly put together for me on what's going on in the Top Hat. And so um, one idea I really liked from Kapila Kaushik was that augmented reality should make it easy for decision makers to visualize the underlying data trends and the impact of decisions taken based on that data. For example, let's say a bank wants to launch a credit card targeted at people with certain levels of income and credit score in a given region. Employees of such a bank would benefit from visualizing the impact of their strategy and be able to turn the dial on each of those factors, right? So this is maybe actually being able to see it directly in an easily visualization. Now, some of that's more um, pure visualization, right? Not necessarily augmented reality, but you can see how maybe being able to interact with that data in kind of a communal setting, like if we can all kind of visualize those aspects together, might be very useful, right? Um, and um, being able to, and she talks again about examples about IKEA, being able to project those into your office. I think that's a great idea. Um, Jennifer Archer mentions in agriculture, right, the sale of crop protection is being discussed in many cases prior to the crop even being planted. We have to rely, though, on the based upon the retailers or growers' past memory of how the crop looked to see whether or not what's important to apply in that space, right? Um, if you had augmented reality, right, and you were launching a new fungicide or pesticide or something like that, right, you could potentially see I like this idea, right? You can see what the crop would look like without the fungicide or with the fungicide, and kind of be able to give them kind of a more closer comparison as to what that would happen, right? And maybe, granted, you could probably just give them a bunch of stats that would do the same thing, but we know that sometimes some users are motivated more by emotional aspects and visual aspects than they are by statistical aspects. So I think that's kind of an interesting thing to take a look at. Um, Jeffrey Mullock talked about how AR can be used for within marketing to help expose consumers to a product or service before purchase. For example, a builder could use AR to help potential home buyers tour an existing house, or a custom house built to their specifications. Now, that borders a little bit on virtual reality, right? So, in a virtual reality context, you could have them tour a whole house. An AR house, though, one thing I think would be kind of cool is imagine that you have your model home, right? That almost all builders build to give people a sense, and then you could tune the model home to exactly what the consumer wanted, right? Like if they made these kind of selections versus these kind of selections, what would the model home look like? That kind of gets to an augmented reality space, right? And that would be really cool. You could also imagine that as you're walking around the model home, you want some information. Like you're like, oh, I don't like that particular cabinetry. Is there other options for that cabinetry, right, that I could get? And using augmented reality, you can interact with the space and explore all the different options of what the cabinetry could be. I think that'd be really cool. But great idea, Jeffrey, for sure. Um, Trey Lewis mentioned that I would be interested to get to talk to a few workers to get their opinion on technology. For instance, does it really provide meaningful data, or is it just a shining toy? I can imagine the benefits for training might be awesome. And from the marketing context, I can see this being very valuable in a car dealership. Try to vision walking around a car and seeing all the specs listed in the air, seeing all the different options, again, similar to the house, right? That you could see what exactly it would look like. Yeah, and then maybe even being able to push a button on the augmented reality thing that would just immediately call over the salesman to make the sale, right? I like the idea, similar to the kind of the house idea, Trey, in many respects, right? Being able to see all the different options, maybe be able to get more information about what the different configurations would allow. I think that's a really cool idea. Now, you go on to mention, Trey goes on to mention he doesn't think this has mass market right away, like with the Google Glass, right? Appeal. And I mean, I do think that is an issue. And I think that, as I mentioned in my previous office hours, I assigned this reading for the first time 4 years ago, right? But it still seems current because there's still all these discussions about whether or not augmented reality is kind of something that could be in the future, right? Or whether or not it's something that we could apply right now, right? So I'd love to see some more discussion about that, some more insight into whether or not this is a useful technology. I think there is a lot of people who think of this as just a shiny new toy, right? And I would caution any marketer against adopting a technology just because it's the shiny new toy, right? You really need to think about what the impact is, what the return on investments of working with that technology is going to be, and think that through. So I think those are important notes. Um, so that's pretty much everything I had planned to talk about today. Again, I apologize for not being able to show you the slides as I was talking through them today, but I'll make sure and upload them online. And I should have that fixed by next week. I just didn't want to restart the office hours while I fix that because that would be a pain in the butt to some extent. So hopefully this will work. I'll hopefully this format's working for you on the YouTube. If you like it, let me know. If you don't like it, let me know. If you have any questions at any time, let me know. As I said last week, and just to remind you for next week, it's if you're going to ask questions during the YouTube office hours, just make sure you get them in early, because sometimes I'll end the chat before you begin, because there is a delay between when I'm talking and what you're seeing. So don't wait for me to say a particular thing before you post it. Post as soon as you think about it. So just again, to sign off, I always like to go back over the to-dos for the week. And so for this week, it's watch videos 1 to 5, right? Participate in the discussion on blockchain on Top Hat. Make sure and read the articles first, obviously. Turn in your team member request. That's by far the absolute most important one. If you don't turn in a team member request, you get assigned to a random team. So don't do that. Don't be that person, right? Like, well, go ahead and turn in. Even if you're by yourself, that's fine. Just let me know that you're by yourself. and I'll put together the teams. Finally, read chapters 1, 2, and 4 in the textbook if you want it. Those are the optional readings for the week. Other than that, that's about it for now. I am going to sign off shortly, and I will post this video almost immediately for everyone to see. Take care, everyone, and have a good week.